She arrived at the private car rally wearing worn jeans and a plain navy blue sweatshirt, her hair tucked into a simple ponytail. The event, held at a prestigious raceway outside the city, attracted the wealthiest car enthusiasts, from tech moguls to hedge fund billionaires. Gleaming sports cars lined the track, their paint jobs sparkling under the clear sky. Engines growled and conversations buzzed as attendees showed off rare models worth more than some homes. When she walked into the pit area, heads turned and nod in admiration. Several men standing beside a candy-red Ferrari exchanged glances and smirked. One of them, a man in an expensive leather jacket, chuckled under his breath. "Lost, sweetheart?" he called out loud enough for others to hear. Laughter followed, low and dismissive. She smiled politely and kept walking, her boots crunching lightly on the gravel. Inside, her heart pounded, but outwardly she exuded a calm patience born of long experience. Her name was Sarah Jensen, 36 years old, practical, steady. She had come not to spectate but to participate, having been invited by a private sponsor, impressed by her previous amateur track performances. She had spent years quietly honing her skills on rented tracks and late-night sessions far from the spotlight. But here, among the privileged and powerful, her plain clothes and modest demeanor marked her as an outsider. At the registration tent, a volunteer wearing a branded polo shirt hesitated before speaking. "Are you sure you are in the right place? This is a closed event for registered drivers only." Sarah pulled out her invitation letter, her hand steady. The volunteer glanced at it, eyebrows lifting slightly in surprise, then waved her through with a mumbled welcome. As she made her way to the assigned driver's area, she could feel the stairs trailing behind her. She heard fragments of whispered conversations. Who let her in? Maybe she is just here to clean up afterward. Across the pit lane, Richard Dalton, owner of the Dalton Automotive Group, leaned casually against his rare silver McLaren. Tall, graying, and sharp-eyed, he was a fixture of the elite racing scene, both feared and admired for his ruthless business acumen. He watched Sarah with mild curiosity, then dismissed her with a shrug. Probably someone's assistant sent to fetch coffee. Near him, Blake Harrington, heir to a private banking dynasty, adjusted his sunglasses and snickered. "I will give her 3 minutes on the track before she stalls out." Sarah found her designated vehicle, a sleek graphite gray coupe, provided by the sponsor. Not the flashiest on the field, but finely tuned, a pure driver's machine. She inspected it carefully, running her fingers over the body panels, checking the tires, the brake lines, the suspension. It was habit, born from years of having to trust her instincts over a mechanic's assurances. As she worked, she became aware of a group gathering nearby, watching her movements with thinly veiled amusement. "Look at her," one of them muttered. "Probably thinks this is a Sunday drive through the suburbs." Sarah said nothing. She focused on her preparations, blocking out the murmurs. Confidence came not from their approval, but from the hundreds of unseen hours she had invested when no one was watching. The rally's opening announcements blared over the loudspeakers. A well-dressed announcer listed the day's schedule, explained the track layout, and emphasized safety. Each driver would get 2 warm-up laps, then a timed competitive lap that would be ranked on the leaderboards. The best times would be celebrated at the gala dinner that evening. Engines roared to life as drivers lined up for their turns. Sarah slid into the driver's seat, adjusted the mirrors, tightened her harness. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself, then started the ignition. The car responded with a low purr, eager and alive. She guided the vehicle toward the track entrance, slotting in behind a vivid orange Lamborghini. Ahead of her, the drivers revved their engines, posturing for the crowd gathered along the barriers. Sarah kept her car steady, ignoring the showboating. When her turn came, she guided the coupe onto the asphalt. The first lap was cautious, learning the curves, feeling the tires grip the surface. The track was a technical one, full of sharp turns and short straights that punished overconfidence and rewarded precision. The second lap was quicker, building rhythm, sensing where the limits lay. Observers along the fence watched her with detached curiosity. Several shook their heads, unimpressed by the lack of aggressive speed. Blake Harrington, lounging with a drink in hand, laughed openly. "She drives like my grandmother." When the announcer called for the start of her timed lap, Sarah inhaled deeply, then exhaled slowly. The signal flashed. She pressed the accelerator down smoothly but firmly, launching the car forward. The graphite gray coupe hugged the track, its engine rising into a steady, controlled crescendo. At the first tight corner, where several earlier drivers had braked too late and lost time, Sarah executed a flawless trail brake, maintaining her speed through the apex. She was not the flashiest, she was not the loudest, but she was precise, surgical, methodical. At the hairpin turn near the southern edge of the track, where Blake Harrington had spun out during practice, Sarah downshifted perfectly, pivoting the coupe around the bend without losing momentum. Spectators began to lean forward, realizing something different was happening. Richard Dalton narrowed his eyes, studying the line Sarah was taking. It was not showy, but it was efficient. Ruthlessly efficient. Sector times began flashing on the timing monitors. Fastest first sector, fastest second sector. A murmur rose from the crowd. Engines idled, conversations paused. Blake lowered his sunglasses to stare at the scoreboard in disbelief. No one said anything now. They watched as Sarah Jensen carved through the track like a sculptor shaping marble. When she crossed the finish line, the time posted on the leaderboard sent a visible shock through the gathered billionaires and racing elites. It was not just good, it was record-breaking. Sarah guided the car back into the pit area calmly, her heart pounding against her ribs, but her expression composed. As she stepped out, silence greeted her. The same men who had laughed earlier now looked at her with something between disbelief and awe. The announcer's voice crackled over the loudspeakers, slightly breathless. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have just witnessed the fastest lap ever recorded at this rally since its founding 15 years ago." She removed her helmet, shaking out her hair, and handed it calmly to a nearby attendant. Around her, the atmosphere had shifted palpably. Where there had been derision, now there was stunned silence. Richard Dalton pushed off from his McLaren, squinting across the pit lane at her. Blake Harrington stared, mouth slightly open, drink forgotten in his hand. Sarah ignored them. She retrieved a bottle of water from a cooler and took a slow sip, the cold liquid soothing against the adrenaline still singing through her veins. In the distance, she heard the announcer recalculating times, confirming over the speaker that there had been no error. Her time stood. Not just fastest of the day, but the fastest recorded since the rally's inception 15 years ago. As she sat on the low wall near her car, cooling down, a small group of event officials approached. Their demeanor was a sharp contrast to earlier, polite, respectful. One of them, a middle-aged man with a clipboard, cleared his throat nervously. "Miss Jensen," he said, "you have qualified for the elite heats later this afternoon. We would be honored if you continued to compete." Sarah looked up at him with a polite smile. "Thank you," she said simply. "I would be happy to." The man nodded, relieved, and hurried back to the official's tent. Across the lot, conversations resumed, but the tone was different now. Curious, speculative, even admiring. Not far away, Blake Harrington pulled Richard Dalton aside. "You ever heard of her?" he hissed under his breath. Dalton shook his head slowly, eyes never leaving Sarah's figure. "Number. But I intend to find out everything about her before the day is over." Meanwhile, Sarah stood and stretched, rolling out the tension in her shoulders. A few drivers, now emboldened by the shift in perception, approached to offer congratulations. One or two even asked technical questions about her driving line, her braking points. Sarah answered courteously, but kept her replies brief. She had learned long ago that validation from such circles was fleeting. The real victory was internal. She had proven something to herself that no sneer or smirk could take away. The afternoon progressed, the air warming under the steady sun. In the elite heats, Sarah was seated first, drawing the attention of the rally's elite racers. Some were gracious, others competitive, but all were careful now not to underestimate the woman in the plain navy sweatshirt. When it came time for her run, the stands were full. Spectators who had earlier barely glanced at her now watched intently. Cameras turned. Drones buzzed overhead, capturing every second. Sarah approached the track with the same methodical calm. She buckled herself in, adjusted her gloves, and rolled onto the starting grid. Engines roared on either side of her, testosterone and horsepower filling the air. She tuned it all out. The track was her arena, the asphalt her familiar ally. The starter raised the flag. She launched forward at the signal, the graphite coupe responding like a living thing under her control. The tires gripped, the chassis flexed, the world blurred at the edges. At each corner, Sarah braked a hair later than her rivals dared, yet maintained control. At each straight, she opened the throttle just enough to maximize speed without sacrificing the next entry point. Her lap was a masterclass in balance, aggression tempered with precision. The crowd could sense it. Roars erupted at each checkpoint as her sector times flashed green for fastest. In the final sector, she pushed even harder, taking the last chicane with a daring inside line that left jaws hanging. She crossed the finish line and the leaderboard erupted. Another record, not just for the event, but edging close to professional track records set by licensed racing drivers. As she coasted back into the pit lane, the roar of the crowd was unmistakable. This time, no one doubted her place among them. No one questioned her right to compete. As she parked the car and stepped out, a cluster of event officials and media rushed toward her. Flashbulbs popped, microphones were extended. "Miss Jensen, what is your background? Are you a professional racer? Who taught you to drive like that?" She smiled slightly and gave the same answer to every question. Years of practice. Among the crowd, Blake Harrington hovered, unsure whether to approach. His earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced with something approaching sheepishness. Eventually, gathering his courage, he stepped forward. "That was impressive," he said awkwardly. "Really impressive." Sarah met his gaze, holding it steady. "Thank you," she said, her tone polite but cool. Blake shifted uncomfortably, clearly searching for words. Before he could stumble further, Richard Dalton approached. Unlike Blake, Dalton's expression was composed, respectful. "Miss Jensen," he said, offering a handshake. "Congratulations. That was some of the finest driving I have seen in a long time." She shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Dalton. I appreciate that." Dalton nodded thoughtfully, studying her with a businessman's keen eye. "If you ever consider professional competition, I have some contacts who would be very interested in speaking with you." Sarah inclined her head. "I will think about it," she said, but her heart told her that was unlikely. She raced for the love of it, not for sponsorships or fame. Still, she appreciated the offer for what it was. Genuine recognition of her ability, not her appearance. As she turned away, the announcer called for the awards ceremony to begin. Drivers and spectators alike gathered near the podium. Gold, silver, and bronze plaques gleamed under the afternoon sun. When Sarah's name was announced as the overall champion of the rally, the applause was loud and sustained. She climbed onto the top step of the podium, the simple navy sweatshirt standing in stark contrast to the designer jackets and custom racing suits around her. She raised her trophy high, not in boastfulness, but in quiet pride. In the crowd, some still whispered about her origins, speculating how a woman so unassuming could have outclassed seasoned millionaires and billionaires. But most simply watched with a new respect, recognizing that true talent needed no flashy packaging. After the ceremony, Sarah slipped away quietly, avoiding the after-parties and the offers of interviews. She preferred a quiet drive home, the hum of the engine her only company. Later that evening, as the gala dinner commenced, stories of her lap circulated like legends in the making. Blake Harrington recounted her cornering technique with a mix of awe and chagrin. Richard Dalton made a point of mentioning her performance to influential guests. By the end of the night, Sarah Jensen had become more than an anomaly. She was a benchmark, a reminder that skill, passion, and perseverance could outshine privilege, pedigree, and appearances. Driving back along the coast with the windows down and the cool breeze tousling her hair, Sarah reflected on the day. She had walked into that rally as an unknown woman in simple clothes, facing skepticism and mockery. She had left a record holder, her name etched into the rally's history, but more importantly, she had walked her own path, on her own terms, proving once again that the only validation worth having came from within. The next morning dawned crisp and bright, the sky a clean sweep of blue over the city. Sarah woke early, still carrying the quiet satisfaction of the previous day's triumph. She brewed a cup of coffee in her small but tidy kitchen, savoring the rich aroma as she scrolled through a few articles on her phone. To her surprise, her name had started to appear in local news coverage. "Private car rally, shaken by unknown driver's record lap," one headline declared. Another read, "Unassuming woman leaves billionaires speechless on the track." She chuckled softly to herself. It was not fame she sought, but she could not deny a small flicker of pride. She had shown them, not with anger, not with confrontation, but by letting her skills speak louder than their prejudices ever could. After breakfast, she took a long walk through her neighborhood, greeting familiar faces along the way. The baker setting out fresh loaves, the elderly man who always watered his roses precisely at 9 o'clock, the children racing their bicycles up and down the sidewalks. Here there were no supercars gleaming in driveways, no designer suits, no mocking smirks, just life, honest and unpretentious. It grounded her, reminded her that her worth had never been determined by anyone else's expectations. She returned home feeling centered, ready to move on from the events of the rally. But life had other plans. That afternoon, a sleek black sedan pulled up outside her modest house. A driver in a crisp uniform stepped out and approached her front door. "Good afternoon, Miss Jensen," he said respectfully. "Mr. Dalton requests the pleasure of your company for lunch if you are available." Sarah arched an eyebrow but kept her expression neutral. She considered declining. She had no interest in being paraded or patronized. But something in the driver's demeanor, formal yet genuinely respectful, made her reconsider. Perhaps it was simply curiosity. She nodded. "Let me grab my jacket." The drive across town was smooth and uneventful. They pulled up in front of an elegant but understated restaurant tucked between gleaming office towers. Inside, Richard Dalton stood as she entered, greeting her with a handshake. "Thank you for coming, Miss Jensen. Please, join me." The waiter led them to a private corner table where the noise of the lunch crowd faded into a comfortable murmur. Richard ordered 2 coffees without asking, as if understanding instinctively that Sarah would prefer simplicity over extravagance. Once the drinks arrived, he leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. "I wanted to congratulate you again," he said. "What you accomplished yesterday was extraordinary." Sarah accepted the compliment with a nod but said nothing. Richard smiled faintly. "Straight to business then," he said. "I am putting together a team for an upcoming endurance rally. It is less about speed, more about strategy, consistency, and mechanical sympathy. It requires a rare blend of skills, and frankly, I have not seen talent like yours in years. I would like you to consider joining us." Sarah stirred her coffee slowly, thinking. She appreciated the offer. It was not every day a man like Richard Dalton extended such an invitation, but she also knew the cost of stepping into that world. Endless scrutiny, pressure to conform, sacrificing the quiet life she cherished. "I am honored," she said carefully, "but I need to be clear. I am not interested in changing who I am to fit anyone's mold." Richard's smile widened, genuine and approving. "That is exactly why I'm asking you," he said. "I do not need another polished, preening showboat. I need someone real, someone who understands that the car is not an accessory, but a partner." Sarah studied him for a long moment, measuring his sincerity. Finally, she said, "I will think about it." "That is all I ask," Richard said, lifting his coffee cup in a casual salute. They spoke for another hour, discussing track conditions, mechanical setups, and driving philosophies. Sarah found herself enjoying the conversation more than she had expected. Richard was knowledgeable, passionate about the art of driving, and refreshingly devoid of the arrogance she had encountered in so many others. When they parted ways, he handed her a simple envelope. Inside was a handwritten invitation to the team's first training session, scheduled for the following weekend. "No pressure," he said with a wink. "Just show up if you feel like it." That evening, as Sarah sat on her small back porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, she turned the envelope over in her hands. Part of her was tempted to leave it unopened, to preserve the quiet life she had built so carefully. But another part, the part that thrilled at the memory of the track, that relished the harmony between machine and driver, urged her forward. She had proven herself once. Perhaps it was time to see how far she could go on her own terms. The week passed quickly. She returned to her routine, balancing work at the community center with evening runs along the coastal trails. She maintained her car herself, changing the oil, checking the brakes, making small adjustments to keep it running perfectly. The simplicity of it soothed her, grounding her in a world that often seemed obsessed with appearance over substance. Yet each night, before turning in, her eyes strayed to the envelope resting on her kitchen counter, unopened but not forgotten. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool. Sarah woke early, her decision made. She dressed in her usual way, jeans, a simple t-shirt, worn-in boots, and grabbed her driving gloves from the hook by the door. She tucked the invitation into her jacket pocket, more out of ritual than necessity. As she slid behind the wheel of her own modest car, she smiled to herself. She was not doing this to impress anyone. She was doing it because she loved it, because it made her feel alive in a way nothing else could. The training facility was located an hour outside the city, nestled between rolling hills and dense woods. As she pulled into the lot, she noted the line of high-end vehicles already parked there. Ferraris, McLarens, Bugattis, each one gleaming under the morning sun. She found an empty space at the far end and parked without hesitation. Heads turned as she walked toward the group gathering near the registration table. She ignored the stares, focusing instead on the familiar ritual of checking her gear, stretching lightly, preparing mentally. Richard Dalton spotted her and smiled broadly. "Glad you decided to come," he said, clapping her lightly on the shoulder. "Welcome to the team." Around them, the other drivers murmured amongst themselves, some curious, some skeptical, a few openly dismissive. Sarah caught snippets of conversation. Is she serious? What is she driving? A Corolla. She kept her expression neutral, neither inviting nor responding to the comments. She had been here before, metaphorically, if not physically. She knew exactly how this would play out. The instructors gathered everyone together and outlined the day's program: warm-up laps, braking drills, precision cornering exercises. The goal was not to show off, but to build consistency and endurance, the hallmarks of successful endurance racing. Sarah listened carefully, noting the key points, mentally adjusting her strategy. As they moved to the vehicles, she caught sight of her assigned car for the day. A lean, stripped-down endurance racer, built for function over flash. She ran her hands over it appreciatively, feeling the fine craftsmanship beneath the simple exterior. As she climbed in and strapped down, she allowed herself a small, private smile. This was where she belonged, not among the spectators, not among the critics, but here, on the track, where skill, focus, and heart mattered more than polished shoes or pedigrees. The first few laps of the morning were designed to loosen everyone up, to familiarize drivers with the track layout and the vehicles. Sarah took it slow at first, feeling the car's balance, noting how it responded under throttle, under braking, around tight bends and sweeping curves. Many of the other drivers roared past her on the straights, engines screaming as they pushed for top speed. Sarah let them. She was not interested in showing off. She was interested in learning, in mastering. She understood the truth that eluded so many others. Endurance was not about how fast you could go at your best moment. It was about how consistently you could perform over hours and hours when fatigue set in and concentration slipped. It was about discipline. As the day wore on, the instructors ramped up the difficulty. Cone drills to test braking precision, timed laps to test pacing, mechanical problem simulations to test crisis handling. Sarah moved steadily through each challenge, never the fastest, never the flashiest, but always precise, always composed. Some of the younger drivers, cocky and overconfident, flamed out quickly. Their times dropped. Their tempers flared. Sarah stayed steady, lap after lap after lap. At midday, the team broke for lunch. Clusters of drivers lounged around picnic tables, eating catered meals and trading boasts about past races and near misses. Sarah found a quiet spot near the edge of the field, unwrapping a simple sandwich she had brought from home. Richard Dalton approached, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He offered her one without a word and sat down beside her. "You are impressing the instructors," he said after a while. Sarah shrugged lightly. "I am not trying to impress anyone. I am trying to get better." Richard laughed quietly. "That," he said, "is exactly why you are impressive." The afternoon session was grueling. Extended runs at race pace, driver changes practiced over and over, vehicle inspections timed and critiqued, the sun beat down, and fatigue began to take its toll. Sarah felt it too, the ache in her arms, the heaviness in her legs. But she pressed on, finding that deep reserve she had cultivated over years of quiet, unseen work. Near the end of the session, the instructors announced a final test, a full-timed endurance run, 30 laps without stopping, simulating a real race segment. One by one, drivers took to the track. Some set blistering early laps but faded badly as the run wore on. Others made critical errors, spinning out or missing braking points. When Sarah's turn came, she approached the task the same way she approached everything else, methodically, patiently. She paced herself, hitting her marks, conserving her tires, managing her fuel. Her lap times were steady, varying by no more than a second from start to finish. When she crossed the line after the 30th lap, she was not the fastest, but she was the only driver who had maintained consistency from first to last. The instructors gathered everyone around and debriefed the day's work. They praised the fastest drivers for their speed, but it was Sarah they singled out for consistency, focus, and professionalism. In endurance racing, one instructor said, "It is not the fastest driver who wins. It is the one who makes the fewest mistakes. It is the one who can perform on lap 1 the same way they perform on lap 100. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what wins races." As they dismissed the team for the day, Richard caught up with Sarah. "We are running a full simulation race next month," he said. "I want you on the roster." Sarah considered for a moment, then nodded. "I am in." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Sarah balanced her day job with grueling evening training sessions. She spent weekends at the track, refining her skills, learning the intricacies of pit strategy, driver changes, mechanical troubleshooting. She studied telemetry data late into the night, analyzing her braking points, her throttle application, her cornering speeds. It was exhausting. It was exhilarating. She loved every second of it. As the simulation race approached, whispers began to spread among the racing community. Who was this woman Dalton had brought in? Where had she come from? How had she impressed so many so quickly? Speculation ran rampant, but Sarah paid it no mind. She was not doing this for them. She was doing it for the pure love of the craft. The morning of the simulation race dawned cloudy and cool, the perfect conditions for endurance driving. Sarah arrived early, her gear neatly packed, her mind focused. The paddock buzzed with activity as teams made final preparations. Richard greeted her with a firm handshake and a rare smile. "Ready?" he asked. "Always," Sarah replied. The race was brutal. 6 hours of near constant driving, broken only by driver changes and refueling stops. The track conditions changed as clouds rolled in and out, bringing patches of drizzle that turned corners treacherous. Cars spun out, engines failed, tempers flared in the pits. Through it all, Sarah remained steady, lap after lap, stint after stint. When the checkered flag finally waved, Dalton's team stood atop the standings. Not because they had been the fastest outright, but because they had been the most consistent, because they had made the fewest mistakes, because drivers like Sarah had kept their heads when others lost theirs. As the team celebrated in the pit lane, Richard pulled Sarah aside. "I have had offers already," he said, chuckling. "Sponsors, team owners, agents, they all want to know who you are and how they can get you on their rosters." Sarah smiled faintly. "Tell them I am just someone who loves to drive." Richard laughed. "Somehow I think that is exactly what will make them want you more." He clapped her on the shoulder. "You have a rare gift, Sarah. Do not ever let anyone convince you to hide it." Later that evening, as the team gathered for a low-key dinner at a nearby restaurant, Sarah found herself seated at a table surrounded by seasoned drivers, mechanics, engineers. No one mocked her now. No one questioned her place. They listened when she spoke. They sought her insights. They respected her. And not because she had demanded it, because she had earned it, one lap at a time. When she finally slipped away into the cool night air, she stood for a long moment on the sidewalk, breathing in the scent of rain on pavement. She thought of where she had started, of all the times she had been overlooked, dismissed, laughed at, and she smiled. She had never needed their permission to be great. She had simply needed the chance to show them what greatness looked like. The next few months unfolded like a dream Sarah had never dared to imagine. Word of her performance at the simulation spread beyond the private rally circles. She began receiving invitations to participate in exclusive endurance events, not as a curiosity, but as a respected competitor. Each invitation was handwritten, respectful, acknowledging her skill rather than questioning her background. She accepted a few carefully chosen ones, always under her terms, always balancing her love of driving with the simple life she refused to abandon. At her first major endurance race, held on a historic track in the countryside, Sarah arrived the same way she always did, Jeans, simple shirt, worn boots, carrying her own helmet and gloves. No entourage, no show, just herself. Other teams, stacked with professional drivers and backed by millions of dollars in sponsorships, eyed her curiously. Some smiled politely, others whispered behind their hands. A few remembered her from the rally, and their greetings were genuine, their respect hard-earned. The race was grueling. 18 hours of shifting weather, mechanical failures, strategy calls. Teams dropped out one by one. Sarah's team, made up of a mix of veterans and upstarts, stayed in the hunt through discipline, strategy, and sheer determination. When Sarah climbed into the car for her final stint in the dead of night, the track was a slick ribbon of danger. Rain lashed the windshield. Visibility was near zero. Tension crackled over the radio as spotters called out hazards. But Sarah was calm. Steady hands, smooth inputs, controlled aggression. She found the rhythm where others found chaos. Lap after lap, she clawed back time, overtaking more powerful cars whose drivers struggled to adapt to the conditions. She drove not to survive, but to conquer. Each corner an opportunity, each straightaway a moment to breathe and push. When dawn finally broke and the checkered flag waved, her team crossed the finish line third overall against all odds. In the pits, exhausted and mud-splattered, her teammates lifted her onto their shoulders, cheering wildly. Cameras flashed, journalists shouted questions. Sarah simply laughed, the pure sound of someone living entirely in the moment. In the weeks that followed, the offers became more serious. Factory-backed teams offered contracts, endorsement deals trickled in. Interview requests from prestigious magazines and television programs piled up. But Sarah was careful. She turned down most of it, accepting only what allowed her to stay true to herself. She did not want to become a brand. She did not want to become a symbol stripped of substance. She wanted to race, to grow, to keep that connection to the pure joy that had started her journey. One crisp autumn morning, a letter arrived at her home. Heavy cream-colored paper, embossed lettering. An invitation to the annual Legends Rally, the most prestigious private racing event in the country. Participation was by invitation only, extended to those considered the best of the best. Past winners included former Formula One champions, Le Mans victors, World Rally legends. Sarah stared at the invitation for a long moment before smiling quietly to herself. She had not campaigned for this. She had not networked or lobbied or played politics. She had simply raced. The Legends Rally was held on a private mountain course, winding and treacherous, famous for rewarding skill and punishing arrogance. Sarah arrived as she always did, in her modest car, carrying her own gear. Around her, the other participants arrived in convoys of gleaming trailers, support crews bustling like bees. She found her assigned pit space and quietly began preparing. As she tightened her gloves and adjusted her helmet, a familiar figure approached. Richard Dalton, dressed casually in jeans and a leather jacket, his silver hair tousled by the wind. He offered her a warm handshake. "I heard you were coming," he said with a grin. "About time you joined the Legends." Sarah smiled. "I am just here to drive." Dalton laughed. "And that," he said, "is exactly why you belong here." The first practice sessions were a revelation. The course twisted through dense forests, up sheer cliffs, along narrow ridges where a single mistake could be catastrophic. Sarah took it slow at first, learning every nuance, every camber change, every blind corner. Others attacked it aggressively, setting fast times early. Some crashed out, their hubris laid bare against the unyielding terrain. Sarah built her speed lap by lap, trusting her method, her patience. By the second day, whispers were circulating through the paddock. "Who is the woman in the graphite gray coupe? Have you seen her lines through Sector 3? She is surgical, precise, unflinching." On the final day, the event organizers announced a special challenge: 1 lap, full course, no restrictions. Fastest time wins the Legends Trophy. Sarah listened to the announcement, heart steady, mind clear. She was not here for trophies, but she would give it everything she had, not for glory, but for the sheer, unfiltered joy of driving. Drivers drew lots for starting order. Sarah pulled a late slot, allowing her to watch others go before her. One by one, the elite took to the mountain. Some were dazzling, some faltered. The course claimed a few more victims, mechanical failures and driving errors piling up. When her name was called, Sarah slid into her car, tightened her harness, and rolled to the starting line. The course marshal gave her a nod. She returned it with a slight smile. The flag dropped. She launched forward. The car surged onto the course, tires biting into the tarmac. She attacked the first series of switchbacks with surgical precision, the tires singing but never sliding. On the narrow ridgeline, she kept her hands steady, resisting the temptation to overcorrect. In the forest section, where the light flickered and danced through the trees, she trusted her instincts, braking exactly when needed, accelerating with just enough force to maintain balance. The final sector was a brutal uphill climb, hairpins stacked one after another like a staircase to the sky. Sarah stayed calm, letting the car's momentum work for her, minimizing braking, maximizing flow. As she crested the final rise and crossed the finish line, she knew deep in her bones that it had been the lap of her life. Silence fell over the paddock as the officials tallied the time. When the number flashed onto the leaderboard, a collective gasp rose from the crowd. Fastest lap of the event. Fastest lap in the course's history. Sarah stepped out of her car to a wall of stunned applause. Drivers who had once dismissed her now approached with open admiration. Legends of the sport clapped her on the back, shaking her hand firmly, offering sincere congratulations. At the awards ceremony, when her name was announced as the new record holder, Sarah accepted the Legends Trophy with quiet grace. No triumphant fist pump, no boastful speech, just a heartfelt thank you. She had come into their world uninvited, uncelebrated, unacknowledged. She had left it as a legend. That evening, after the ceremonies and celebrations wound down, Sarah found herself standing alone at the edge of the mountain overlook, the cool air brushing against her skin. Below her, the track twisted like a sleeping dragon, silent now, but alive in her memory. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sounds and sensations wash over her. The rush of tires on tarmac, the rapid-fire chatter of the engine at redline, the deep stillness between corners where instinct took over and thought fell away. Footsteps approached behind her, soft on the gravel. She turned to see Richard Dalton, hands in his jacket pockets, a wry smile on his face. "You did it," he said simply. Sarah chuckled softly. "I did not come here to win," she said. "I came here to drive." "And yet," Dalton said, "you did both." They stood there for a long moment, looking out over the moonlit course. Finally, Dalton said, "You have a gift, Sarah. Something rare. Something the racing world desperately needs, and you do it without ego, without pretense." Sarah looked at him, studying the lines of weariness and wisdom etched into his face. "I appreciate that," she said, "but I am not interested in being someone else's project." Dalton laughed, a genuine, full sound. "I would not insult you by trying. You are beyond that." He grew serious. "Just know, wherever you choose to go from here, you have earned every bit of respect this world has to offer. No one can take that from you." She nodded, feeling the weight and truth of his words. As they walked back toward the paddock together, Sarah reflected on the strange, twisting path that had brought her here. From being mocked at the private rally, dismissed because of her plain clothes and unassuming manner, to standing atop one of the most revered stages in motorsport. She had not changed who she was to fit the mold. She had reshaped the mold to fit herself. It was not about proving others wrong. It was about proving herself right. The next morning, Sarah packed her gear into her car and began the long drive home. The Legends Trophy rested in the passenger seat, but it was not the hardware that mattered to her. It was the journey, the thousands of unseen hours spent practicing, learning, failing, and trying again. The moments of doubt she had faced alone, the quiet victories no one had witnessed. They were what had built her. They were what would sustain her long after the headlines faded. Life returned to a new kind of normal. Sarah continued working at the community center, continued maintaining her own car, continued taking long walks through her neighborhood where few people knew or cared about her growing fame. She received invitations to larger events now, offers to join professional teams, even tentative approaches from sponsors wanting to plaster her image on advertisements. She turned most of them down politely. She had no interest in becoming a commodity, but she chose a few opportunities carefully, ones that allowed her to race on her own terms. She entered endurance events that prioritized skill and grit over spectacle. She volunteered at youth driving programs, teaching kids that racing was not about money or image, but about discipline, respect, and passion. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she became a symbol to many. Not the flashiest, not the loudest, but the realest. At one event months later, Sarah crossed paths with Blake Harrington again. He was less brash now, more thoughtful, the edges of arrogance worn down by experience. He approached her with a tentative smile and an outstretched hand. "Miss Jensen," he said sincerely, "I just wanted to say, you changed the way I look at a lot of things." Sarah shook his hand firmly. "Good," she said simply. "Maybe next time you will not judge someone by their shoes." Blake laughed, a little embarrassed, but he nodded. "That is the plan." The two parted ways amicably, a small but meaningful marker of how far things had come. Sarah did not need apologies or accolades. The true reward was seeing change ripple outward, however quietly. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories were not measured in trophies or lap times, but in shifting perspectives. As seasons changed, Sarah continued to race, continued to live simply, continued to defy expectations without making a spectacle of it. Her legend grew not because she sought it, but because authenticity has a power all its own. People could sense it, they respected it, even when they could not fully understand it. Years later, long after that first private rally where she had been mocked and dismissed, Sarah Jensen's name would be spoken with reverence among racing circles. Not because she had the flashiest cars or the wealthiest backers, but because she embodied the purest spirit of the sport. Quiet strength, relentless discipline, uncompromising authenticity. She would become a mentor to young drivers, a sought-after voice in discussions about the future of motorsport. But she would never lose sight of the simple truths that had carried her to the mountaintop. Talent without arrogance, confidence without cruelty, pride without pretense. And whenever she needed to remind herself of why she started, she would return to small local tracks where nobody asked for autographs, where engines roared and tires screeched, and the only thing that mattered was the next corner, the next lap, the next breathless moment of pure connection between human and machine. There, away from the noise and the glare, Sarah Jensen was not a legend or a symbol or a champion. She was just a driver, and that, above all, was who she had always wanted to be. The years moved steadily forward, but Sarah Jensen's approach to life remained unchanged. She never chased the spotlight, never sought out fame, and never allowed her success to turn into arrogance. She still lived in the same modest house, still drove her simple car to the local grocery store, still volunteered her time when she could. Fame had come knocking many times, louder each year, but she never opened the door too wide. She knew who she was, and she knew that no trophy, no magazine cover, no lucrative sponsorship could ever replace the feeling she found on the track, that pure and rare connection where everything else fell away and only the next corner mattered. At the National Awards banquet one winter evening, Sarah was called to the stage to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award. The grand ballroom was filled with hundreds of people, from titans of the automotive industry to world champion drivers. Cameras flashed. Applause echoed off the high ceilings. Sarah walked to the stage in her usual quiet way, wearing a simple navy dress, her hair tied back without ornament. She accepted the heavy glass trophy with a nod and stepped to the microphone. For a moment, she stood silently, looking out over the sea of faces, most of them smiling, a few of them misty-eyed. Then she said, in her calm and steady voice, "I was never supposed to be here. I was never the one they expected. I was the one they laughed at, the one they underestimated, the one they dismissed. But none of that mattered, because I never raced to prove anything to them. I raced because I loved it, because it made me feel alive." She paused, her voice steady. "Never let anyone else tell you what you are worth. Never let them define your limits. Know who you are. Trust it. That is what matters." The room erupted in applause, standing ovations sweeping the floor from end to end. Sarah gave a small smile, nodded once more, and walked back to her seat. After the ceremony, dozens of people came to speak with her, to shake her hand, to thank her for her words. Young drivers spoke of how she had inspired them. Veterans spoke of how she had reminded them why they started in the first place. Industry executives offered opportunities, sponsorships, and honors. Sarah accepted the handshakes and the thanks, but she declined most of the offers. She knew that adding more titles or endorsements would not make her happier. Staying true to herself would. In the months that followed, Sarah quietly retired from competitive racing. She had nothing left to prove, not to the world and not to herself. Instead, she poured her energy into mentoring young drivers, particularly those overlooked by the traditional pathways. She established a scholarship program to help talented kids without resources access proper training and opportunities. She taught workshops on discipline, humility, and mental toughness. Her influence rippled outward, unseen by most, but life-changing to those she touched. One afternoon, she received a letter from Thomas Reed, a young driver she had coached years earlier. He had just won his first endurance championship and had dedicated the victory to her in his speech. In the letter, he wrote, "You taught me that real strength does not shout. It simply endures. Thank you for showing me the way." Sarah read the letter twice, smiling quietly. She placed it in a wooden box in her living room, alongside a few treasured mementos, the invitation to her first private rally, the envelope from the Legends rally, and a photograph of her standing beside her car, holding the Legends trophy with a small, contented smile. She never needed to line her shelves with trophies to know her worth. She carried it inside her in the way she lived her life, in the choices she made when no one was watching. And those choices, quiet and deliberate, had changed the course of more lives than she would ever know. Years later, long after her racing days had ended, a group of young drivers would sit around a battered table at a training camp in the mountains, swapping stories about legends they had heard of but never met. Someone would mention Sarah Jensen, the woman who drove in worn boots and simple jeans, who left billionaires speechless, who shattered records without ever raising her voice. They would speak of her with the reverence reserved for the rare few who had not just excelled, but transcended. They would talk about how she had redefined what greatness looked like. Not polished, not packaged, but pure, real, unbreakable. And somewhere, far from the spotlight, Sarah Jensen would be walking along a coastal trail, the wind in her hair, the horizon wide and endless before her. No cameras, no crowds, just the open sky and the steady rhythm of her own steps. She would pause at a cliff's edge, looking out over the restless sea, and she would smile, because she knew she had lived her life exactly the way she had raced, with courage, with discipline, and with heart. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and join our community of story lovers. We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever been underestimated or judged by appearances? Or have you witnessed someone rise above expectations in an unforgettable way? Your stories might inspire others. And remember, true greatness is not measured by wealth, fame, or titles. It is measured by how you live when no one important is watching. We will see you in our next story, where another powerful lesson awaits.